Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Chris Lubkeman. I'm the head of the Strategic Foresight Hub here at the ETH in Zurich. I have the privilege of being the host for today's global lecture entitled Gender in Leadership and Leadership in Gender. The ETH Global Lecture Series is a platform for contemporary topics to be able to be discussed with outstanding global thinkers. Each month, we bring two amazing individuals together to discuss their personal insights, interests, experiences, and expertise. In addition to simply satisfying our curiosity to learn, we also hope that these dialogues will expand our perspectives so we could actually broaden our thinking, challenge our opinions, and through this, make an even more meaningful contribution to our society and to the societies around us. Today is International Women's Day, and I am especially honored to host this conversation with two really fantastic humans. First, I'd like to introduce Alice Eagley, Professor of Psychology Emerita. Got to make sure I got the gender right on that one. Emerita at Northwestern University, a social psychologist who has published widely on the psychology of gender and the attitudes, and especially the attitudes of change and attitude structures. So welcome, Alice. Great to have you here with us.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, Alice actually knows Zurich quite well because I think you spent some time here at the University of Zurich as a guest professor. Is that correct?
I did.
That's
I did.
And did you have a favorite restaurant?
There were many good restaurants, but I didn't particularly have a favorite.
Okay. All right. That's a good answer. I think the gastronomy will love to hear that. Her discussion, her discussion partner today, who is sitting next to me in our studio, is our Vice President for Personal Development and Leadership, Julia Danath-Shu. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, Chris.
It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Julia holds a doctorate in psychology, is a mother of three, and comes from a very small village in Germany where, as she said to me earlier, it's a place where I grew up, pragmatism always trumped theory. So the way she looks at so much of her professional career as a scientist, as a researcher, now helping us be the best version of ourselves, this is something which she holds very dearly to herself, and was working as a consultant, most recently as the CEO of a consulting company supporting organizations in Europe, Asia, and the United States, developing their leadership and corporate culture. And she just joined us in 2020, right? During COVID.
True. This is true.
So it's welcome to have you here.
Thank you, Chris.
And do you have a favorite restaurant in Zurich?
I have hundreds of favorite restaurants in Zurich. I'm eating all the time. So.
Well, I'm always asking, just in case anyone wants to go. So our time together, the three of us and all of you online, will be about 60 minutes. I'm going to start our dialogue with Alice, and then with Julia, and then also turning to you, our audience, for questions. You're welcome to send questions in at any time during our time together, and I will do my very best that I can to integrate those into our conversation. I apologize ahead of time if I can't get to all of them, but typically we're actually able to weave them in. So make sure you send those on in either through the Q&A or through the chat. So, are you guys ready? Are you gals ready?
Yeah.
Are you people ready?
Born ready. Yeah.
Born ready. All right. So, Alice, it is really wonderful to have you here, and I have a question for you. Gender bias, where are we? Have we made any progress at all?
Where are we?
Yeah.
Well, we've come a long way in my lifetime.
Yes.
So I think we need to recognize the progress around the world in terms of having more women in leadership. If we look at political leadership, I think the worldwide average is about the same as the average for the Congress, the average for parliaments and Congress. It's about 27% worldwide. Okay, well, that's not so good. Well, no, it's not 50, but it's not zero. So when I was a child, it was very close to zero in the United States. In fact, the first woman, well before my time, but the first woman in Congress was 1918. And there was one. And then there would be like 2 and 3 for a few decades. And then the rise to 27, 28%. So there's been a rise, and that's around the world. Also, even heads of state, as you well know. I mean, in Europe, there have been several. I think there have been over 50 women heads of state around the world. And there were like very few who weren't, royalty queens in the earlier ages. So there's a lot of progress, but there's a long ways to go.
Yeah.
And so very much sort of in the middle of a long process as we move toward equality.
Yeah. It's great to hear you say that. And I think, because very often we look at the negative before we look at the positive. And as you say, there's a long way to go. What would you attribute some of the best successes with this progress, and I will call it progress, on the path? What has been, in looking at this, what are some of the best, what's allowed this to happen?
Well, I think it's many-sided. In 2 points in history, there have been women's movements, social movements, complaints about not having enough power and status in society. One in the U.S. was until women got the vote in the 20s. And then later, starting in the 60s into the 70s, there was a very intense women's movement. So there was a lot of activism and women beginning to desire political representation as individuals, to take roles. Some countries put in quotas. And those can be effective if backed by sanctions, like the Norway quota of 40% women on boards was backed by the sanction that you would have to cease being a private company, and being able to, have stock and that sort of thing if you didn't quickly move to 40. But that's an extreme example of a top-down change from the government. Many countries, such as the U.S., don't have quotas, but there's, gradually there's pressure and desire of women to be in the roles, and then women's acceptance by the public as having the qualities suitable for a leader. That's improved over time. So it's been a gradual process, and it is continuing, and it hasn't stopped. If we look at our U.S. statistics, the Congress creeps up in women's representation. Every year it just creeps up a little bit. So
Let's hope it keeps continuing, creeping up at we wish we had an asymptotic instead of a creep. Right.
I think there's no reason to predict it would not, continue. And then getting women in very powerful roles. In the U.S. we haven't had a president, but we have a vice president, finally, who's a woman. And the Speaker of the House is a very powerful woman. That's on the, television and news shows and everything all the time. It definitely helps when you get some women in these roles for them to be seen.
Right, yeah, sure.
By the public and be seen acting effectively, as indeed Nancy Pelosi has been extremely effective. And so we see her all the time. That's what we need. And that changes people's ideas about who can be in the role and be effective. And then they're more willing to vote for women, and women are more willing to run, because there has been, on the side of women, there is something of a deficit in wishing to run for political office. And that has been closing. That has to close too. That women to be eager to take on the role.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd hear you. That's good. Julia, you were going to...
Yeah, I was reflecting on what you were saying, and I was wondering... So you come from this international and macro perspective, looking at political institutions, and I just try to reflect on our microcosmos that we have at ETH here, and I ask myself, what is the situation here at ETH, and what changed over years, and why? And because I also think that at ETH we have some very strong women right now, and when I ask them right now, how is your situation? A lot of them say, it's great. I can do my science, I can do my teaching, and I don't feel discriminated. But, and at the same time, I think they know, or they should know, that this is all only possible because of the history and of the things that some pioneering women, very strong, encouraged women, and the first and second generation of female professors at ETH, for example, kind of fought for them, and they stood up and did all those things. And sometimes it only needs, or maybe not only, but it needs some strong, uncomfortable personalities that are very impressive and are willing to carry the burden for the generations to come. And I think this is what we experienced at ETH as well, seeing that the first and second generation maybe were kind of uncomfortable and always edgy and trying to fight and do something. And now we are at a point where we can say, okay, a lot is already good. Yeah. It's not great, it's not perfect, and we are still not where we want to be. Yeah. But maybe the pain factor is a little bit minimized. Mm-hmm. This has positive sides and negative sides, but it is in the end the pain factor is minimized. This is what I think.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. You know, I got my PhD in the 1965, and entered a department in a university, and you know there were just like 2 or 3 women and like 55 men, and so that was, I mean, they were for the most part quite welcoming. They were not unkind toward me, but there's just a feeling that you're under scrutiny, as indeed you would be as one of these this small group. So it was uncomfortable just because of the numbers, you know. But then then my career, it's changed radically, particularly in psychology, which is a field that has attracted a lot of women. Yeah. But still, the professor when I got my degree was highly male dominated. But now in most psychology departments, it is, you know, maybe even 50-50.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a really interesting, an interesting observation. I think it's a very strong observation. I look at my daughter and in the world that she's in now as a young woman, a 23-year-old, and compared to the life of my mother, who's 80-something when she was 20. Mm-hmm. The contexts are so radically different, and even her image of what she can do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think this is what for both of you as being role models, that young women can then see, I can do this. I see this, I can reflect in that.
Right.
And sometimes, very often, tell me, very often we talk about the glass ceiling, or like or the glass, or the mirror. I mean, like when you're looking at a glass ceiling and it's black, all you see is a mirror. You see yourself. You can't see anything else. Mm-hmm. Is this? Cause I think you've written about this, actually, Alice.
Yes, I've not been a fan of the glass ceiling metaphor. You know, it caught on very quickly. I think, like in the early 70s. But the problem with it is it suggests a rather absolute barrier. You know, you can only get so far. And the idea of glass is actually slightly demeaning to women, because the idea is you don't see it. See, it's glass, clear. You look up and you think, oh, I'm going to be able to move to the top of this company or whatever because I have the talent and motivation. And you don't see that you're going to hit your head on this thing. Gotcha. This barrier of discrimination. So it is a little bit defeatist. Yeah, so I've advocated an alternative metaphor, which is the labyrinth. So, and that women have something more like a labyrinth in career progression, and men have more of this nice straight road. So the labyrinth, you can get to the center, you know, but it's more complicated to get there. And yes, you might encounter discrimination along the way, but you figure your way around it. That's the wrong turn, right? When you end up there, then you take another route. So that it's more challenging, and that you know, you had to negotiate the fact that most people are used to having men in leadership roles in particular, and you're a woman who comes along. So you have to think that there might be some problems here, and think them through, so that you can get through this labyrinth.
If I think of the labyrinth, I mean, I'm thinking of a straight path, and a labyrinth, it must be exhausting. I'm just thinking about how exhausting it would be just to keep turning right and left.
Yeah, it takes more brain power to do it, and and it would be more exhausting. Yeah, so that's the idea, that women might recognize they would face challenges that men don't to the same extent. And that's something to think about, discuss with people, particularly with women who are in leadership roles and seem to do it well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so give it thought. Don't be naive, like hitting your head on a glass ceiling
Right.
that you didn't see. We don't want to do that.
Right. Well, I mean, if we think of different industry sectors, because you've mentioned politics as one sector, we have academia as a sector, then there's like consulting or corporate there are many different sectors. Would you say it's the same, that each one of those is equally has a labyrinth, or is a labyrinth more complex or less complex depending on the sector?
Well, it must be, because the corporate sector has been very slow. Women, CEOs in the large companies like our Fortune 500, 6%. It seems never to get to 10. And that's very different from politics, right? Where we have, many more women. So the corporate sector at the higher levels, if you look at all CEOs in terms of, small companies too, then women have better representation. But the large corporations are really a place where progress has been slow. Well, it's faster in particularly educational institutions, healthcare. Right. But political leadership, not a little slow, but still much more visible progress than large corporations. Although their boards, at least I guess in the US and maybe typical of other countries, their boards now have, about a quarter women, I think.
Right.
When it was pretty rare to have women 50 years ago on corporate large boards for large corporations. So there's progress, but that's particularly needing work, you might say.
Yeah. But let me ask you, you did a piece of research, I believe, here in Zurich, while you were here in Zurich.
Yes.
And the title of the paper, I have it right here, is "Where Are the Women Deans?"
Right. Yeah. So the role of dean, of course, is a leadership role, an important one in universities. And we were interested in looking at women's representation, which is, far less than men's. The study was a study of the deanship at a large number of German-speaking universities. So we got as much cooperation as we could in, Germany, Switzerland, and
Austria.
Yeah. So we had quite a large sample, and we had a sample of associate and full professors who, in theory, could move up and be a dean at some point. So we looked at over time. There were 2 time points about a couple of years apart. So, were they interested in becoming deans, men and women, and then were they recommended for the deanship? And so we actually did not find any overt discrimination in the overall statistics. We found that women and men were equally likely to be recommended for the deanship. You have to go through a process where you become recommended as the candidate to go forward. That was equal. But what we found is that the reasons men and women found the job of dean appealing, that they wanted to do that. Many people don't want to do that. They just want to do their research. They don't want to do administration, right?
Yep.
But a portion of men and women would like to move into these leadership roles. And so the women's motivation, what was correlated with the job being appealing, was that they felt they could do something for other people, for the university, make it a better place, make it more welcoming to women and minorities potentially. And men's motivation was more weighted with achieving power and status and a higher salary. So that goes along with some of the themes we often see in the psychology of women and men. The women are more what we call communal in psychology, more sort of caring about link to others and wishing, to make the world a better place and people individually. So the motivations were somewhat different. But the result was equal recommendation to move up into the deanship. And that is a good That's a very good sign, right?
No, I think that's actually
And
really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, women's representation in university deanships, and other high-level executive roles has increased a lot
Mm-hmm.
in German-speaking countries. In the U.S., about, I don't know, I think it's about 32% of presidents of colleges and universities are now women. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just a massive change over my lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah, so women are doing pretty well. And no, we did not find evidence of discrimination in this study that we did
Mm-hmm.
through the University of Zurich.
Yeah.
The head researcher was a doctoral candidate then, now PhD, Lefke Henningsen. And then
Yeah.
Professor Klaus Jonas was her advisor. And the three of us worked together on this project.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you for that. So, but I want to come back. I want to stick on this word leadership and gender, and because I know, Julia, this is something which is quite dear to you because you've joined us as the vice president for leadership, right? And so, in the title is gender and leadership, leadership and gender. How do you see this in leadership?
Yeah.
Is there a difference in how one leads or the qualities? What's your view on that?
Yeah, there is no easy answer to that question, I would say. But when I reflect on leadership and gender, on those entities, and I ask myself, how important is gender in leadership? Is this really the most important thing, or is this really the differentiating part of good or successful leadership or not? I quite often, out of experience, not out of kind of research, but out of experience, I think that gender is not the important part of leadership, because gender is part of my identity. From psychological background, gender is part of what is my identity, what is important to me, what lies within my personality. But it, in the first place, is not my behavior. And leadership has a lot to do with behavior. And when I joined ETH, I thought, we should have a look at behavior. We should have a look at how people treat each other, how we create social communities, how we act with each other. So it's more or less about behavior. And you can train behavior, or you can improve behavior, or you can feedback behavior and discuss about behavior. But gender is not debatable, or it's not, I don't know, it's not better to be female in leadership than to be male in leadership. So from my perspective, the gender issue is no longer such a important thing. It's more about how do we care, how do we inspire, how do we kind of train or challenge or whatever, how do we treat our people? And this has nothing to do in the first place with gender. Of course you can say women overall behave differently than men, but I do think it's more important to look in a specific situation and ask myself, where can I grow in my leadership style, and what is appropriate or not appropriate in the way how I treat my people. And this is one part. The other part is, of course, it makes a difference whether we have in our leadership team female representatives and male representatives. Of course, it makes a difference. And it also makes a difference whether we only have white people there, or whether we also have colored people there, or whether we only have well-educated people, professors and doctoral candidates for a position, or whether we say, okay, we also take people coming from the corporate world, as myself, for example, being in such a board. So there are so many different aspects, so that I think gender is no longer the most important part.
But let's think about behavior for a moment. Are there certain expectations about behavioral characteristics, and say that Allison's your research, that one expects or accepts certain behavioral characteristics from one of the genders compared to the other?
I do think, of course, we know all this stereotype research, and we know that there are some traits that are obviously more female traits than male traits. And you, Alice, you know better. You said, when we discussed earlier, you said something like the empathetic part is obviously more a female part in interaction. And this is shown in research again and again. And maybe there is something like a female behavior, but you, Chris, can be as female in your behavior as I am in the end. And maybe this is also changing in our society. When I ask my sons, for example, when I say to my sons, all the three of them are male, and I say, I'm your mother, I'm the empathetic one, and you are not, they are more than irritated, because this is not a category that this generation is still using by describing themselves. So maybe they are more or less used to identify with female and male attributes and not being only in one gender at home, so also with behavior. So, yeah.
That's great. So, Alice, what about for you?
Yeah. The usual analysis is that leadership has a fairly masculine set of expectations of taking charge and being assertive and often being competitive depending on the nature of the role. You may have to be, like in corporations. And so it's fairly masculine, not without expectations for social skills. In fact, that's increased a bit over time in the data, that we expect leaders to have social skills too. But then the gender stereotypes are that women are the more communal, caring, compassionate, socially skilled sex, and men the more agentic. So there's this match between leadership expectations and male expectations more than with female. There's many a study that can show you that in the data. That people's expectations for leaders are more like their expectations for men than women. And so then that puts women sort of a little bit at odds. And well, is that a problem? It could be. In particular, there are demonstrations of what we call backlash. So when women leaders become dominating, start telling people what to do, in a rather aggressive way, shall we say, then they get backlash. People don't like that. They won't cooperate with them. While men can get away with that, so to speak, that's okay. If a man is pretty dominating. And so we do find some at least small behavioral differences on average between male and female leaders. The women in leadership roles do act more in a more democratic, egalitarian style than men, who are more prone to take charge by being more autocratic and more top-down characteristics but that's just on average, Just if you average over lots of men and women, you'll get women more leading to the democratic and men toward the autocratic. And you can do leadership both ways, depending on the context.
Sure.
But I think in educational institutions and some others, our expectations are more or less we want to be treated like equals, right? Even though somebody might be my dean, I think I should be treated, on the one-on-one like an equal, not like a subordinate. So I think educational institutions kind of press men and women toward a more democratic style. And when they don't have that, I've seen men get into trouble when they seem to get into the role and think they can rule, and tell everybody what to do. And the people they're trying to dominate are professors who think they're quite important or whatever, that they can get backlash too.
So, Julie, you're about...
Just for clarification, when you say in educational institution, a more democratic leadership style is what is needed, because this is what people expect when they go to educational institutions, why is the situation for women then so hard? Because this should be a perfect place for women to be successful, right? When this is what it's needed, a democratic leadership style, and this is where women are obviously kind of better than men. So wouldn't that be a perfect place for them, or?
Yeah, the thing is, it is good. We do see in educational institutions more rise of women than in most other institutions. It is good, not perfect. This phenomena would still operate, like some people would not want to have a woman as their boss, so to speak. They might, men in particular, be uncomfortable with it. It's still there in the culture, but it's just less. It's less of a problem, I think, for the reasons you've articulated. And so it is a good institution. These institutions are good for women.
So,
And even at lower level schools in the U.S., the school has a person called a principal, a head. A school like an elementary school, a high school. There are many more women now in those roles. But it was unknown when I was a child. So it's a place where we do have real progress.
yeah.
But we're still working at it. Yeah.
I think there's two things which just makes me, what you were just talking about makes me think of what you're talking about your sons.
Yes.
And the generational differentiation of expectation, of contextual expectation. And I wonder, and I ask myself, so how long will assertiveness still be considered masculine? Because I know many assertive women. So, and you're saying, well, as on average, you said on average, and we sort of, are we propagating, not a myth, but are we propagating stereotypes by even naming that again and again and again versus saying, actually, there's assertiveness, and as a leader, you need to be assertive, you need to be empathetic, you need to be a bit of everything depending on the moment.
Yeah, this is what I sometimes, what I totally believe is that we kind of nurture beliefs like assertiveness is a male one, and by nurturing this belief again and again and again, we maybe foster stereotypes and don't leave enough room so that assertiveness is also assigned to female leaders as well. Or I don't know whether it's assertiveness, that's something that you know better, Alice, whether assertiveness is also part of it. But the nurturing of beliefs, from my perspective, is one thing that hinders us in the end to reach the goals that we all have. So,
right. Well, yeah, the stereotypes represent what is now, because we get them from observation, at least in part. We see more men who are obviously acting in a commanding style. We see more of those than women who are. If I look at like our vice president, no, she doesn't come on with a commanding style. She comes off as definitely confident, though. So, but we see these things, and the way to get rid of them is that our observations have to change.
Yeah.
And everyday people don't go around talking about the stereotypes. They're more implicit.
Yeah.
They're in their minds, and therefore, they make it uncomfortable with a woman in charge, but that's less so. And we see that in public opinion data in the U.S. There's this famous question that the Gallup poll has been asking for many decades. If you had a new boss, whatever your job, whatever your level, person in charge, would you prefer to be a man or a woman? And it's evened out, Like people say, oh, neither. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just like, hey, give me a good boss. But they're no longer choosing a man. So that's great that their expectations certainly have changed.
Yeah.
But yet our expectations, I think, in the U.S. are still, like for the president, is quite masculine. They have to deal with things like war that we have now. And so it's still pretty masculine. And we did have, though, a female presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton. So.
I can share a personal story with you, which is a short personal one.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, short personal story. Sure. So, I have 3 sons, and when my third son, when he was about 4 or 5 years old, it was the 3rd time that Angela Merkel was re-elected. And we kind of discussed this at the table, and he asked, quite seriously, a question whether it would be theoretically possible that a man can become Chancellor of Germany as well. And it was a serious question from this 5-year-old guy who was always, who grew up with the belief that the Chancellor has to be a woman. And this is, this is a totally different framework. Yeah.
That's right, because it's what you see.
That's wonderful.
That's what he had seen.
Yeah, that's what he saw. Yeah,
got this idea, but you know, as an older person,
that's great.
you haven't seen that many
Yeah.
women in those high positions. So we have to change what, you know, the underlying phenomenon, and then the stereotypes follow along.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask, a question came in, which I think is kind of interesting. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I think I want to come back to the behavior and what we observe. And like with your son, saying what he's observing, he's only seen a woman chancellor, a woman leader, so could it be something else? Could certain behavioral mechanisms also be defense mechanisms? Because in this labyrinth, you learn certain behaviors in order to navigate or survive. So therefore, as a woman, you would be judged more harshly if you talked about your ambition, because you're supposed to be democratic, you're supposed to be egalitarian.
Yeah.
So therefore, you kind of shove it inside, you hold it in your pocket, and you don't tell anybody, like, because there's a defense mechanism. Is this the question which came in? I thought it's a really intriguing one.
Yeah, I mean, I think women do learn to sort of tone down their ambition, at least publicly, sure. There are some studies show that women's, what they call cover these masculine qualities, and, you know, present more with feminine or more androgynous qualities. Yeah, I think women learn to do that. You know, you kind of learn on the job. You do something or other that you can see people kind of looking in a strange way at you. Yeah, and then I would, you know, in my own just day-to-day life, sometimes I get very, you know, assertive. Maybe I'm very concerned about something, and then sometimes with a person I don't know well, I can see they're like, you know, what's this woman? Is she out of control? No, she's just talking loud. And, you know, so then you learn to kind of tone it down in a way that a man would not have to do. So there's a lot of learning. And that's negotiating the labyrinth.
Yep. So Julia, what about you?
I would assume that this is also true the other way around. I've never been male, but I would assume that also a male leader learns by observation and maybe hides away some emotions or some kind of behavior, knowing that the world expects something differently from him. So, I think this is also true for male leadership. And when we do want to have a more I don't know, purposeful leadership or more democratic leadership or more value-based leadership, when this is what we all have in mind as a utopia, maybe then we should not categorize that hard into female and male leadership, but kind of aligning more on what is the leadership that we would all kind of strive for, and not in those categories. Because I think that also male leaders, do have to hide away some things, as you said before. Maybe they are sometimes more empathetic or more emotionally touched than they allow themselves to show. I don't know, but maybe that's also
they might
true.
be seen as weak. And there was, like, our president, Joe Biden, has a much softer way of presenting things than Donald Trump, right? So I think, you know, you have these intimations that you read about that maybe he's weak, you know, not so maybe Putin came on because he's weak, but you know, I don't see him that way. I see him as a very effective speaker who's more calm, but those pressures are there. And we can't say that people can't react or shouldn't react the way they do. It has to be a change over time where they see an Angela Merkel or a Joe Biden who's kind of calm in his demeanor. They see them being effective. And that changes things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, let's if we think about that, there's also these behavioral characteristics we observe. It has a lot to do with culture, and I'll say cultural expectations. Like in certain cultures, it is expected that you behave in a certain way, right? Or you know, this is ethnographic studies will say, you know, something. So we in the liberal West, we have an evolution of how we imagine some of these, quote, roles to be. And so
Yeah.
the question to you, Alice, from the research standpoint, to what degree does culture define so much of these rules, or are these sort of inherent characteristics when it comes to leadership and these behavior characteristics that they're independent of place?
Well, no, I think culture is important, particularly on expectations for dominating top-down leadership or something more egalitarian um, would be tolerated. Yeah. So, yeah, that would be embedded in the cultural traditions for sure. So, if a very dominating form of leadership is culturally expected, probably that'll be more difficult for the women. That probably indicates a stronger division of labor and whatever. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it would depend.
I mean, I know I kind of answered my own question when I asked. It was a very leading question, but I'm trying to think
Yeah.
of to what degree do we think about cultural change, and to what degree this can be part of also cultural change, this evolution of a culture to being more equitable, not just equal, but also equitable, and to what role gender bias plays in an equitable society, and this evolution towards that.
Yeah. Well, women, in political roles tend to be more concerned with equity and helping the poor and the dispossessed and children. That if you look at studies of parliamentary bodies at various levels, we do see differences between the advocacy of the women and the men. What kinds of initiatives do
We just lost, if you hear us, Alice, we just lost the stream. So we're going to hope you come back in just a second.
to the group
There we
and
go.
fight for? And there are differences.
Okay, we've got a little, I'm not sure if it's still online okay or not, but we'll see how, and you're going to have to tell me here in the control center. I'd like to ask Julia you a question, and I want to come back to this idea of, not come back to on the table, this idea of exceptionalism, right?
Yeah.
Because we all are unique. You're unique, I'm unique,
Yes.
but we all do need to eat when we walk or talk, and etc. So we have a lot of things in common. So when it comes to gender bias, when it comes to leadership, in your observation, you've walked both the corporate world, the research world, and now in administrative world. What do you see?
What I see is that in each and every world I was in, or I lived in, or I was allowed to lead a team, each and every person said, we are unique here, and we are special, and we are extremely special. And the most special people are at ETH. So saying, of course, ETH's culture is special, and being in academia is special.
Oh.
And
I am back.
hey,
You're back,
welcome
Alice.
back. Good to
Can
have
you
you
hear me now?
again.
We can hear you now. Thank you.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear us yet. Okay, maybe on the Zoom icon, we'll get you in there. Maybe on this side, we've got to get the microphone. We'll just give you 2 seconds. We'll just see if we can't get that just back in. And we asked Alice earlier, for those who can see, about the picture behind her. I think she said it was her
Grandfather.
Her grandfather.
grandfather.
Yeah, her grandfather, and I'm trying to think if I don't think I was dressed up in one of those either, but I have kid pictures, but it don't quite look like that one. It's the generational differentiation.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So let's keep going. So
maybe I can say so. Okay, ETH, a special culture, a special situation here, and also special needs in leadership. And this is something that I heard in each and every microcosmos that I was in. People, and this is maybe part of us being human beings, that we kind of think that we are special by nature. Of course we are. And of course we have to acknowledge what is special in the academic and research field when it comes to leadership. And there are some things that are really special. For example, that a leader here has a changing team each and every fourth year in a period of 3-4 years. And this is extremely special. And to have a special power hierarchy in academia as well. So this is very special. And there are other attributes as well, but there are also some common denominators that we do have when it comes to leadership. And to focus on them and saying, okay, I realize there are some needs, some things, some desires that we as human beings have all in common, that we strive for. We want to live up for our passion. We want to be seen by the others. We want to have appreciation or recognition or whatever. So all those things that are more or less in common in human nature, this is something that each and every leader all over the world, whether it is the corporate world or the academic world, has to strive for, have to take care of. And this sometimes I have the feeling that by saying we are so special, meaning no one can understand or no one can tell us what we should do because we are too special. We're so special, so we don't need any feedback or we don't need anything because no one can really look into our world. This is a closed job. And I would kind of question that. I would say, no, that's not true. There are some things that we really can feedback and that we can see and that we can improve and must improve because leadership in academia is far away from being brilliant.
Yes, but I think one of the things that it's also when you were saying earlier about leadership quality, a good leader does not depend upon gender. A good leader does not depend upon ordering or any single aspect. A good leader has certain qualities, certain characteristics, certain competencies which transcend any of those. Right? Now, would that also go for different cultures? Do these leadership qualities, do you think as a leader, if you're, do you believe that?
Yeah, I think that is definitely true because culture shapes our identity as well, and our belief set and our expectations. And me being a Western German woman, I expect different way of behaviors from my leaders than maybe a male Asian man. So of course there are cultural differences in expectation, in shaping, also in showing behavior. So there are some differences, definitely. And ignoring that we are different, that there are differences between people doesn't help. This saying we are all equal, I mean, of course, we are all equal by the value that we have, of course. We are all equal, but we are all different in character and all different in expectations and all different in desires and beliefs and whatever. And culture does shape identity of people and definitely also is an important influence for leadership as well.
So let me ask a slightly a different tact on this. And if we think of early, mid, and late careers, right, and the different experiences that one gains throughout these times, do you believe, are there different expectations in leadership qualities at these different times? Or is it typologies, or how would you?
Maybe it's a little bit like accompanying a child from birth till a grown-up person. So saying in the early 20s, maybe stereotype categorized overall, you would say we need more encouragement, somebody who holds your hand but challenges you as well and encourages you and give you all the strength on the way and saying, I always believe in you and you go for it, go for it, go for it. So this encouragement part is extremely important in the early stage of career. Also giving a lot of feedback saying, okay, this is great, this is not that good, so maybe you behave like this. And so being a mentor and being quite close in the early part. And maybe by in the end of the career, it's more or less that we come in the role of giving back and becoming the one who shows orientation, gives guidance, encourages others. So that is more or less the moment where we multiply our leadership. It's not about me and my own career. It's about growing other leaders and making others strong and bringing others to the forefront. So maybe, yeah, I'm not sure, but I do believe that we need different things in different parts of our lives. And in the middle part of our life, normally we, as parents, for example, need a lot of understanding, need a lot of support. We are challenged and so many things and forces are on us. So maybe this is the time where we need the most support and the most network around us.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're back now.
Oh, good. Good. I had to adjust to a different speaker. Yeah. I don't know why it went out, but
Well, welcome back.
I'm back.
Welcome back. Now, you know, next time we see you, Alice, hopefully you'll be here in Zurich with us again in the lecture hall, and we'll be able to go and find one of those restaurants which you won't tell me that you liked.
QQ.
Okay, that would be wonderful.
So we were just having a little bit of a talk a bit about exceptionalism and how every group, every entity, be it in a business or an academic institution, thinks that they're so different and so they're so special that many of the rules don't apply to them. And the question was, you know, when we see some of these characteristics, like the context is so unique, no one understands them, or you know, or they think they don't need the same kind of advice.
Yeah. Well, I think knowledge is useful, such as a person, let's say a student, might gain if they took a course on gender in various disciplines, not just my own psychology, because then you learn something about it in general, and you could test it out in relation to yourself. If you don't have that knowledge, I think that you get from, you might get it from everyday life, but I think I certainly was very naive when I was young. I didn't know there were any barriers for women. I knew there weren't very many women as professors when I was a graduate student, but I didn't understand it, you know. And so if you take a course where some of these phenomena that we've been studying, you become aware of them, then you are not so naive.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, if you know about the backlash phenomenon as a woman, you can kind of test your limits a bit. You get into meetings when you're a young professor with others, and then you try being like coming on strong, and then you look at the reactions you're getting, and then you see maybe there's a more clever way to do this. And maybe I need to kind of support the other women in the group by like agreeing with them and encouraging them to talk. And, you know, you sort of gain skills. But if you're totally naive and you don't want to believe that there's anything to gender, oh no, nothing to gender, then I think women become more vulnerable, as opposed to knowing something about it and kind of negotiating within their context and not to simply accept limits, but to wisely go in the direction beyond them. You know, you don't want to be rejected and have somebody tell you to be quiet, please.
No.
You have to learn, but knowledge is helpful, definitely helpful.
Julia.
Yeah, Alice, may I ask you a personal question? You said that you were very naive when you were young. So
Yes.
From the perspective you can take on now, knowing all the things that you know now, what would you have done differently when you think back? Because you said you were naive and knowledge helps, and now you know all those things about gender and career and success and all the leadership. So is there anything you would say, this is something I would have done differently if I already knew everything that I know now?
Well, you know, in the everyday of the career, I think I didn't know enough about how important it is to build relationships, and particularly, you know, relationships with other women who then were rather few when I started out in an academic career. You know, I had the kind of the idea, the lone scholar idea, that you, you know, you try to teach your classes well, and then you write papers, and they should be very good papers, and you submit them to journals, and you move forward. Well, you know, that is not such a simple process. So what does it take to have a paper accepted, and in what context should I work where I could be successful given my skills and, you know, the state of the evidence and this and that.
Interesting.
And so certainly, like in a labyrinth, you make wrong turns, but you can recover. I think I'm one of those. You know, I feel like very lucky that what I call sort of bumbled through somehow.
Well, I think
But making mistakes, but then, you know, reflecting on them. But it would be better not to make mistakes, you know. And so I think that my career, you know, it was sort of more difficult in a way, but that was even mixed because there was also a certain interest in encouraging women when we were rare in progressive circles, which was not everybody, right? But,
well, I think we're not, I think it's not just then. I think we're still encouraging women. We're trying to very hard here in many places as well. So, but Alice, I want to ask you a question because we only have a few minutes left because the hour has disappeared in a heartbeat. It's unbelievable, but not unbelievable with who. You're doing some work right now, some research right now, which is quite interesting, and we didn't have time to get to it today. Can you give us a 2-minute brief? What is
Sure.
it? Yeah.
Well, I'm working actually on two things. They're rather big questions. One is about sex-gender differences. Are they there? Are they not there? And are they big or little? It's a very big question. And then the other is gender stereotypes. Are they accurate or inaccurate? You know, they are easily in the culture dismissed as inaccurate. But actually, you can test that because there's many studies that ask people, say, about the personalities of men and women, and then they relate that to the data, so to speak, that psychologists have about the personalities of men and women. Or we can ask them about the attitudes of men and women, but we have nationally representative data on those attitudes of men and women. So we can test people's ideas, relate them to some criterion that is, you know, valid.
Yeah.
Well. And so the answer, now that there are quite a few studies, we can see the answer out there, and that is that they have considerable validity, but error.
Yeah.
And so, and the interesting question, do they overestimate the real differences, like between men, or underestimate them? You know, sometimes they overestimate, but sometimes people underestimate.
Interesting. Well, I think, Alice,
it's like to get a more valid answer to this thing. That stereotypes, yeah, they are evil because they tend to produce their own realities.
Yeah.
But they're held in place, of course, to the extent they're accurate.
Yeah.
And so we see, you know, considerable accuracy and bias, and we're trying to explain to at least to other social scientists that we need to think about them more complexly, not just, oh, they're inaccurate, or yes, they're very accurate. It's much more complicated. It's in between.
Well, Alice, I think that sounds like a topic for another hour with you, if not an entire afternoon. So I want to thank you on behalf of the ETH and all of our audience for making time, for being here with us, and for being one of the pioneers and making my daughter's life a much better one.
And
So
mine.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for the invitation.
No, it's a
I
pleasure.
enjoyed being with you. I'm sorry that the sound cut out for a while, but we did get back together.
Yes, we did. And Julia, I want to thank you very much
Thank you,
for your
Chris.
time this afternoon and for being with our institution and bringing a new perspective to leadership.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's really great to have you. And thank all of you for coming and joining us this afternoon or this evening or whenever you're seeing this podcast later. And our next global lecture will be taking place on the 21st of April with Ardava Titsani from Relativity Space and Adrian Glauser, Senior Research Associate at the Department of Physics here at the ETH and a member of the James Webb Telescope Project team. So we are heading out to space the next time we talk. So thank you, stay healthy, drink lots of water, eat an apple, and see you soon.